My name is Mohammad Salemy. I'm the organizer of the new Centre for Practice. Tonight we have Sean Tatol, art critic from New York and the editor of the Manhattan Art Review. And we have Çağla Ilk, the incoming director of Maxim Gorki Theater Berlin with us. The topic for today's discussion is freedom overspill. I will just quickly read the abstract for the event and have some introductory words, and then we pass it on to Çağla, and then the conversation will start that way. So the West's post-war consensus on the freedom of expression is no longer taken for granted and now feels threatened from all sides. Right-wing governments increasingly censor or instrumentalize art for their own end. The market optimizes it for its bottom line, and even the left is incapable of defending art beyond its use as ideology or activism. The very meaning of expression itself has become obscure. The question we're asking tonight is, what can be done to adapt to or change these conditions in general? So these conditions apply to art, to artists, to institutions, and to the audience. So we kept it kind of open. Now, to start, I've returned to this volume of art history by the Viennese late art historian Alua Rigo. Very great book. I recommend everyone to buy it and read it. It has been a source of inspiration for so many years of my life. Of course, it's dated because it was written in the late 19th century, but there's a lot in it that resonate, especially as a kind of starting point for conversations. Now, I can talk a little bit about Rigo's background, but you can read about it yourself on his Wikipedia. He was a curator at Vienna's Museum of Arts and Craft, MAC, and he taught at Angewandten, and he died very young at age 47. And this book is comprised of a PhD level course on art history. He gave it once, and then 10 years later he gave it again, and the book brings together these two different versions of this. So it's 10 lectures, and then repeat it again. And it was published in German language in late 19th century, but only became available in English in 2004 when Zone Books decided to publish it. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from it because I think it's sort of like, basically, Rigo sees a new era for art starting, which we can sort of think that we're at the end of that era. And this is the question. It's sort of like, so he's sort of like seeing all the problems of this thing called modern art that's coming to play because it's 1890s, right? So he says, if there is one symptom that could give us pause, namely that so many of us are dissatisfied with what has become of modern art. All things considered, there is one major deficiency in the modern era of art as compared with the two preceding ones. And this is that art has become the privilege of only a few social strata, namely the cultivated elite. To comprehend this shift clearly, one need only recall the popular quality of much of the art of 15th century Florence or Nuremberg. In such places, the whole population seemed to have been breathlessly engaged in artistic issues, and we are already dealing here with the historical moment of transition to modern art. The bonds between visual art and people of all classes were tighter, still during the Attic Golden Age. The artist of that time was really an artisan or Philistine, firmly planted in the ground of tradition. He created nothing more than what everyone already knew. Sort of like Abbas is like your idea of culture yesterday, right? Like people already know that language. People already use that language as culture, right? So the bonds between visual art and people of all classes were tighter still during the Attic Golden Age. The artist of that time was really an artisan or Philistine, firmly planted in the ground of tradition. He created nothing more than what everyone already knew. It was no different with those Germanic Christian or geotest masters who produced art for the glory of God. Today's artist, however, is a distinguished gentleman, churning out pieces to satisfy the predilections of other grand and wealthy men, be these private individuals or institutions such as the state or the church. Now that the stable norm for observing nature no longer exists, every artist looks at it with different eyes. To understand the artist's private vision requires special schooling and a hobbyist enthusiasm. Things, of course, accessible not to the greater mass of the populace, but only to members of the privileged classes. In a word, art has lost its immediate significance for the life of modern humanity. It has become the object of aesthetic appreciation, to which one must be first initiated, then educated. From this viewpoint, one might say that with the dawning of the new era, the golden age of the visual arts has passed away. The illusionism of the Renaissance signaled its farewell gleam. The naive hunger of the larger mass of humanity for fulfillment of its inner emptiness seeks sustenance in a different art form, one that relies not on the sense of sight, but on the sense of hearing. On that one that does not reproduce matter, but rather improves time. That is music. So I'm just going to leave it here because it's kind of interesting that he points to temporal practices and music and something that like expands on time rather than space as sort of like a solution to what he saw as a sort of specialization and a sort of like the elite interest in what was emerging. I mean, he's writing in 1890, so we don't even have like majority of Cubism or any of that out yet, but he sees something and it totally resonates with what we've seen happen since then to what we call modern and contemporary art, right? So I thought this would be a great place to sort of like, because as we all know, the move from artist as artist and someone who works for the state or the patron or the church to make specific things, to artists as an agent of freedom to produce creative new ideas. That's how it was argued. This modern art was argued as such, right? But like I wrote on my Instagram yesterday, that is like, because you know, if you notice, there was a story out finally that like the art market is in tatters, right? Now they admit it after like the last two art fairs, and I just wrote modern contemporary art market is down because contemporary art market was the place for the exchange of prestige among like liberal elite, and liberalism is almost over. So no wonder that the liberal elite that used to use it for sort of like increase and exchange of privilege or prestige have no use for it right now. So it's up to us now to kind of like think about what is the art of this 21st century from now on should be.
I have to answer this.
You don't have to answer it, but I mean, the interesting thing is,
you didn't have your answer prepared? Come on.
You're taking over an institution that is actually is time-based.
Yeah.
It's about the stage. It's about the time,
exactly
right?
That's what I wanted to start with.
And try to do something new with the stuff.
I think if we just to remind that I have started in 2012 as a assistant to the artistic director in Maxim Gorki Theater with a background in architecture, so and a bit performance background. So I didn't have any idea about curating. I was only a visitor of modern art. So like the main idea being in a state institution was to create space for not only theater but also something others. So I didn't know exactly what it could be, so we developed this. Like Berlin is not very known for the herb salon. It's actually salon is a more idea of the French modern at the beginning of the century, where the living artists were shown in these salons because they are mostly like the beginning of the century was the start of the museal thinking from the patrons, because there is no nation state. Nation state has been building, then the national state museums start approaching. So this is very interesting, I think, to think from the institutional side, how the art became institutionalized and how the practice that I started like 13 years ago, it's theater, so it's not seen as contemporary art. So how can we actually deal with some really moments of the glitch and say, here this didn't happen, so why doesn't a hair salon takes place as it had started 100 years ago? It was the first Deutsche hair salon, the German hair salon, took place on 1913 in Berlin with incredible artists many of the first very famous paintings of the expressionists have been presented there, and then that was the first and the last, because then the First World War starts, then the repression and everything. So it became it stayed as a Deutsche Salon, and I don't know if you have seen the exhibition Surrealism in Munich, but it told the movement at the beginning of the century, which was very like international everywhere. Like after the beginning of the revolution, there was a supremacist in Russia, in Soviet, and in Germany, except expressionists, there was none, because like the freedom of speech was not there. What I wanted to shortly say also about the institution and the mark, like the normal institutions from contemporary art museums, in Germany they are state funded, and it's very like good funded moment. So like the galleries are the ones who are bringing the market into this construct. So they play a major role in who is going to play where and in which scale. I had been practicing in the theater where the market has no space. When if you produce in theater, it becomes a theater piece, then it goes away. So what is the value? So I think this fascinates me, as if we want to trigger, I think we need to trigger the main idea of capitalism, the making the money out of it, making a capital out of it. So if the need for that is not there, then I think it loses its meaning. So, and you have the total freedom. That's why I saw this as a kind of a solution to interrupt, through a state-funded institution, the capital market of the art. That there is more freedom for everything. So maybe from this moment we can continue.
So I just want to clarify.
It's a bit complex. I don't know.
Yeah, you talked about two different things. Three different things. First of all, there's a history to lack of freedom of expression in Germany beyond its current sort of like thing that goes back to when the nation state started. So that one thing. The second thing is that,
and this is pointed super in the Surrealism exhibition from Lemba House. Why Surrealism, and it's such an important movement, has no reflection here. So
the second thing was that the ephemeral nature of theater doesn't really produces surplus value, and there's no object to be sold and bought for arbitrage or buy it, hold it, sell it later, more expensive, right? But you see that as an opportunity for theater to find ways to make money or bring the artists to, that's the part that I don't have a problem with it.
No, the way you're wrong. The way you're wrong.
So what do you mean?
I mean, like because the theaters in Germany, they are like factories. You have incredible amounts of people who are regularly paid, really good labor, to be there to produce, and for a play that will vanish away. So actually, for the other side, it's impossible to imagine that you invest in something that disappears. You know, like I think
all the props, everything just disappears.
Like you put it away, but you cannot use it for another thing. So this fascinates me. Something very like the society committed to that, going there, and this is so valuable. And why don't we kind of
reverse it,
or put other elements into that the contemporary art becomes
for art. Okay, yeah. So art can become something that doesn't necessarily need to produce capital, or art can produce capital in a context of a place that doesn't traditionally produces capital, or both?
Actually, if it's in favor of the artist who cannot be a part of this art capital system, and this stays also as an opportunity, because other than the big art gallery connected artists who gives 10,000 euro to produce actually a huge amount of a big ship from a young artist who has no money to realize this thing. We did it, because we don't want to sell it. We just want to have the moment
With the art?
and this stays at the artist's courtesy. So she can do whatever
With the work afterwards.
So we don't deal with it. There is no market in the theater world for that. So I think this
Okay, but you're also pointing out to something. I just want to make it explicit that there's no market, but there's no market metric also. When you don't have a market, you don't have a market metric, so the work won't be judged based on how it would have done in a market. So it just comes and it goes, and the artist can do something with it later.
Yeah, I think, but the value of in the performative part, like the stage, is more. The predicts are different. If the audience reacts to that, this is your capital. If you can bring them for a second time, because we have 400 places. If it's shit, then nobody comes, and you have planned it all the time, 1 year. So
400 seats in the theater.
400 seats, so you have to play it 20 times. So that means you know that nobody is going to come, but you have listed as 20 times. So it's a big risk. But the state, till now, gave you the freedom that you can do as you want.
Even if 10 people come.
Even if 10 people come. Of course, as a director, you can say it's nonsense, it's a waste of money, so let's take it out and play something from the back repertoire that we know that. But the chances stay. I think this is a very different way of thinking, and thinking of the capital. And it brings a bit different space, and a safer space maybe. So that was my proposal, to make this as a place where the people can freely speak, because it's very common, it's spoken and it's there. It's not recorded, it's not shown again. If it's shown again, it has been taken as a fiction because it's the theater. So it's really like a very uncanny moment. So it can be real, it can be not real. So this space I find very interesting to propose as a space for freedom.
I don't know if you like to comment on this, or you want to go back to the question or to the text, but whatever you want to say.
So I think the angle I think of it from is that I think there are two kinds of artistic freedom, and that there's the sort of freedom in creation, there's a freedom in sort of achieving something, or in the production of art that occurs, and that the contradiction, and I think this is sort of what Riegel's pointing towards, is also sort of the implying, or maybe Riegel isn't even implying it, but the issue as I see it is that the sort of intellectual artist of the modern age is someone who sort of discovers new ways of working in the world, and has to continually sort of discover innovations or something to sort of come into something that is differentiated from the past. Where these pre-modern movements where sort of the art was categorically unfree, and institutionalized in, the church, or, court painters
Or
and
the
patronage,
guild,
guilds, the academy, these structures organized art strictly. And it's hard, for me at least, to look at, whatever, Titian's in an art museum and not be bowled over by the freedom realized on the canvas from a place of, rigidity. Actually the rigidity of the form allowed, relatively few very talented artists to find a way to sort of realize a formal freedom that persists and retains interest over time. And the issue is that so there's like a normative society, you exist within it, and if you're a great artist, you find a way to do something within your time, and the sort of formal concerns were sort of settled for you. If you lived in Venice at a certain time, you painted in a certain way, you didn't really have to think about it. And the issue, I think, that arises, or the paradigm that arises from modernity, is the sort of vanguardist mode, where an artist operates in opposition to norms in society and culture, and sort of pushes against these structures to subvert them, transgress against them, change them, etc. Just to be the way to put it, I guess, would be that I think modernity arises because these structures that were the grounds from which art occurred, with Courbet and stuff, the French Academy is kind of getting moldy and decaying, and then you have, as it's falling apart, you have these artists who sort of crop up independently, which leads to the gallery system, and that these artists, to find the sphere of formal freedom in the creative act. I mean, these, it's annoying to have to come up with terms for these things, but the discovery comes from this opposition between the old constricting culture that artists want. They want to be free by resisting and to be outside of it. And that was a sort of binary that ran the script for whatever, 150-ish years. And the problem that I see now is that there's, if there's traditional culture, and then in the 1960s or something, everyone's like, oh, we're gonna be hippies and creating the culture, and it's gonna be different. And that breaking away had a productivity. The issue in the present is that old mode of conventional traditional society has kind of ground down into a more amorphous, differentiated, polarized society that is far less normative and far less constricting. So these constrictions have sort of arisen now in the form, in contemporary art, of what we sort of said in the prompt, which is that there's this sort of leftist instrumentalization, right-wing censorship or instrumentalization, and then the market instrumentalizing it as well. So it's actually a more fraught and sort of insidious system that makes the possibility of finding that sort of formal freedom that a church painter could be left alone to learn how to paint and find some facility that was easier, a lot easier than how we have it now, and that there's a sort of dialectical contradiction in the fact that, you know, there is public funding for art, and that artists are sort of being given this sort of space for freedom, and yet the ideological forms of these institutions are actually constricting in a way that to me just calls for a need to find a different way to find that space of independence, and that I don't have any, you know, real answers for it, except that I think it's possible to do so, and that it's you know, maybe the qualitative difference that I would say, if there's like a difference between, you know, Courbet and Baudelaire versus a artist working today in Europe, is that to do what those artists had to do then, you really had to put your life on the line, and now it's a little too easy.
As long as you're willing to.
Yeah, as long as you play the game, but playing the game sort of oftentimes sort of subverts the verve or the, you know, intransigence that characterizes powerful art to me. Which is not to say that I think institutions are bad, or that, you know, that public funding is bad. Of course these things are good. It's that it's a more of a, you know, existential, you know, societal issue that is, you know, like, you know, it compare it to New York, and it's totally idyllic. That people
In the European context, it's idyllic.
yeah, that you know, you can do installation art. You know, you can only do paintings in New York because we love to keep the lights on, and it's you know, just you see people ripping off another artist openly, just like, oh, you know, Issy Wood is selling, so I better just do Issy Wood paintings, and like no one says anything, and they sell.
Just for a lower price.
Oh yeah, for a much lower price, but it's a you know, collectors are.
Okay, but one thing,
Yeah.
can I?
Yeah.
One thing you shouldn't be doing is to take the funding, produce mediocre or below quality work, and then complain that, oh, I don't have freedom to actually do what I wanted to do. This would have been so much better if there was more freedom, or if I could have the money and the freedom.
Yeah.
And that's you hear that a lot as an excuse of people working in Europe and producing mediocre work. We just saw some of that this morning, right? Like, where that was basically the Berlin Biennale's curators' argument for having a mediocre show. Seriously, it was just like unbelievable to hear that from the person who was like, if you decide to work within the institution, yes, now institutions are far more limited than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But there's still room to do something within that, way less. But you certainly are not going to do it if you constantly want to sabotage that and say, hey, I don't have any freedom. You have to pretend that this is all you have and try to do your best with it. And I think some people manage to do that. It's not like all we're producing institutions right now has no value or quality. It's just that those who do tend to be the artists who accept the limitations that the institution or the funding puts on them, and they basically say, what are my affordances? What can I still do as me as an artist with this kind of trajectory and background within this limit?
Yeah.
So it's already too late.
Yeah.
You know, like this is something different to, and it's such a big thing. If the censorship Three Sisters in the Deutsches Theater, 1989, even GDR couldn't do that. You know, like, so I think the elasticity of our freedom is a bit denser.
Yeah.
In the theater world.
Yeah, I think you know, you know, this talk that we went to this morning, you know, the curator really only talked about the countries of origin of the artists and like the, you know, conflicts going on in their countries, and that, you know, I think there's a sort of and this is the presumption of the sort of what is institutionally condoned, is that the freedom is to show people from many countries, and that is sort of taken as inherently progressive and inherently a forward step in art by the freedom to represent people from everywhere, which I, you know, it's not like I disagree with that, but then I go and see the art and I, you know, question the value of the presumptions in the first place. Just that that I think it's a sort of, you know, instrumentalized, I already said that, but just this sort of almost flipping around or sort of spinning the notion of like what art's value is into something that actually is, to my mind, extra artistic. Like it's a, I think, you know, the way you could sort of spin it out would be that the like logic of, you know, late 20th century art and, you know, minimalism leading into conceptualism, into institutional critique, sort of was a process of taking sort of this fundamental notion of what artistic, you know, autonomy and freedom is, and
Turning it around.
sort of turning it around and sort of expanding it, reflecting it in on itself, and you know, disposing it in different ways that were at the time taken to be liberatory. And I think much of that work is good, but I think it became a sort of pretext to a point where these sort of very rarefied, very developed practices that were based on a rigorous sort of extension or rejection of the inherited languages of art was then sort of given as a handbook for the further decades of art, you know, for the last 30 years or so, where sort of there's a presumption that any sort of movement against the presumption of the institution of, you know, you know, all these old paintings by white men, like that movement against it is inherently good. And I'm not saying it's inherently bad, it's just the inherence that I take issue with. It's that
It could be good, it could be bad.
it could be good, it could be bad, and I think that the issue that takes place is simply that the valuation of art as a category on its own has, I think, been lost. And I think that's, you know, I guess that was in the sort of prompt, was that you know, just these ideas of like what representation in art is, you know, just, you know, whatever. Like
What is symbolic worth?
Yeah, what is Cézanne doing? You know, you know, there's a tree and then you paint it, and like the painting isn't the tree, but there's some relationship there, and that relationship is like what goes on in art, and these sort of basics. Like I was talking to a photographer yesterday, and he was talking about how, you know, he likes Walker Evans, and just because he's interested in just sort of, you know, this idea of just dealing with reality. And I think these sort of institutional norms that the art establishment is working with now are have rarefied art dealing with art and art as an institution, art as a set of terms, that sort of art's relationship to the real is almost non-existent, or in many cases seems like an unconscious element. And I think that, you know, that on like is just a very basic foundation should be at least a term in the conversation.
something you said was kind of interesting. I don't know if you meant to say this or not, but like that there's so much emphasis on giving voice to people from places, both in Europe and non-European context, to have a space of freedom to say something here.
Yeah.
But immediately you expose them to kind of limits of European limits, the institutional limits, but also the political limits that has to do with this particular moment in time where we're caught in like a couple of like devastating wars, and so it kind of creates a cognitive dissonance for those artists too. Who are coming here, because they're like,
sort of.
I thought you were using my name because you want to say that Hungary doesn't allow good contemporary art to be produced, but if I come here and I want to talk about certain things, then I'm not allowed to say that. So what's the difference between here and Hungary? At the end
Right,
of the day?
it's just a softer form of censorship, or a sort of like laundering of the mechanisms of control.
I don't know if you saw that video online, but like the president of the European Union was talking about something, and then a Free Palestine protester started shouting and saying like, people are dying, and then she turned around and said, if this was Moscow, you'd be arrested right now. And then the camera turned around and he was actually getting arrested. And I was like, what?
Yeah. And
this is Europe what we have now.
Yeah.
Actually, so it came a moment last year that like in Berlin there was only one space which was funded by a private entity, so there was no public institution to speak freely about anything. Like I'm not even talking about the war in Gaza. So I think this made a really change in the minds. Like the society always thought, the freedom of speech is in the institutions because it's public funded. This is our space. So we are always super naive to forget the past. Like it was never the case. Like,
right.
And we don't talk about. We're talking about the ideology of nation state, which is actually 110.
Right.
115 years old, and it was never like I'm really thinking that we are super naive to think that the state gave us this freedom.
Yeah. But so this was always
like, coming from Turkey, coming from like, it's the state was the repressor.
Yeah.
Like if you want to speak, so you need to participate in, even though the state was there, because state was watching you.
Yeah.
But you don't say anything wrong. So I'm so accustomed to this, so I never trusted the state. For me, going into the state institutions start to blow them up. Like almost to make something that they don't know what is it, so that they are that these places become uncanny for the people who think that it's a state institution. I think this understanding in Europe and the naive trust after the Second World War that we have built up an incredible democracy where everybody is speaking freely, which Pankaj Mishra wrote in 2017 book openly, that we failed already in 2017, and we are still talking about, it's going to be 9 years next year, this book has been published. Second term Trump, Israel invaded Gaza after the 7th of October, and we still talk about, we have democracy. Nobody articulates it. So I think...
To me, what was always kind of like I felt that naivety even back when Andrea Fraser and institutional critic started to happen, because as someone who had studied musology and history of like, basically if you study curatorial practice, what they do is like they started with like what do you call it in German? Wunderkammer, the camera of wonders.
Wunderkammer.
Yeah, Wunderkammer. It always starts with Wunderkammer and how people put those objects there, and then but you soon learn that right in the beginning of the 20th century, museums were created as a place of statecraft and ideological, how are we going to make the lower classes not rebel? It was always built to limit or delay the revolution. The museums are built like that. So for people to assume that they're discovering that museums are controlled by power, it was always a little bit like naive for me. I was like, when did you think that it was free that now you're discovering in 1970s or 80s that like these spaces are not free? Because if you studied how these spaces in England, in France, in Germany started, it was always as part of a package of, you know, I mean, even in New York, like in New York when they built the Metropolitan Museum and the Museum of Natural History, they put them across the park from each other, and then one is built with like really expensive marble and really nice accessories, and that's for art, and they don't show anything by art there. And then across the street there's the Museum of Natural History that's built with like lower quality granite and stuff and shows nature. And if you read it, they say, we're going to put it over there because poor people live there and rich people already go hunting themselves. They don't need to see nature. But this is, and they write it that this is mostly for Italian immigrants and people coming from Europe. By going to the museum, they realize what a great civilization America has become.
Yeah.
And then the poor people go there, and then the rich people go over to the Met.
Yeah.
And then they can do their prestige thing over there. And then they were going to keep them separate from each other that way, right? So it was very clear from like 1910, 1920s that the institutions are set up as places of like limits.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I think, you know, a couple like, you know, offhand Andrea Fraser thoughts is just that, like, you know, it's big words in her writing are, you know, heteronomy versus autonomy. And I was like, what the fuck is autonomy? Like, I've never heard it, I've never seen it. You know, what is an autonomous artist? You know, like an outsider artist is not an autonomous artist. An outsider artist is like someone who, you know, operates within their own sphere, but is like as, you know, defined by their context as anyone, even more defined by that. And then
I guess autonomy was when people like rejected the salon, or like when in Vienna they created a secession.
Yeah.
So that's the moment. Is the moment flash of autonomy, right?
That's the thing, is I think autonomy is a, you know, what I was sort of talking about before, that, you know, that a, you know, Velázquez could find autonomy as Philip IV's court painter because they kind of let him do what he wanted because he was good enough, and that you know, the autonomy only occurs within the system.
But you know, there's also a limit to that, because there's this church in Murcia that there's this sculpture of a chain around the church, but the artist was so good at doing it that the king cut his hand so he would not do it for somebody else.
Yeah, no, of course. No idealizing at all, but just that it, you know, you can only achieve autonomy in the relation to the cultural sphere. And the other, you know, joke about institutional critique is like, it's a good thing the institutions are unjust, because if they were just, the institutional critics would be out of a job. Like, you know, you know, I think that's sort of always been, not that I dislike institutional critique, but that
when it's good,
but there's a sort of underlying like refusal to engage with or disdain for like what value they want art to have, and that, you know, there's like an alienation from sort of meaningfulness in art as art, that it's art as critique, and that the critique is where the point of the value occurs. But the thing about, you know, that you know, it's only through like a secession or a you know, vanguardist, you know, rejection of the system that one finds a space of autonomy. That problem, I guess, yeah, I think I forgot a thought in here, but it doesn't really matter.
You were into autonomy.
Yeah, but the thing about this notion of finding autonomy within a system, relating it to, you know, what we're saying about contemporary systems and their sort of bureaucratic, like encroaching, or like the secret censorship through bureaucracy, is that the means by which you can resist the system have become almost hopelessly opaque. Certainly in the sphere of art as the place where people get any money. Like, I think it can be very easy to see these contradictions and the, you know, backhandedness and the, you know, be turned off by it. But the space for alternatives, the space for operating outside of sort of a market orientation or an institutional orientation as these two, you know, very demanding forms, it's just extremely hard to maneuver because, and you can, you know, if to be like glib about it, it's you can say that it's comes down to the decline of taste in collectors, that, you know, that patronage, you know, not that I idealize patronage, but patronage, at least, you know, Peggy Guggenheim gave money to artists because someone told her they were geniuses, and she was like, okay, well, here you go.
Better advisor back then.
And you know, and that's like a lot better than managers who think they know better, or, you know, or government ministers who want to get their fingers in.
This is what Julieta brought to the conversation, that like this is like a direct result of contemporary art, or art in general, becoming a financial asset, which started to happen 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And then art advisors, rather than telling you what art is good to buy, they told you what art will yield the highest sort of arbitrage to buy. And the taste was exchanged for profit.
Yeah.
Like the collectors exchanged their sense of taste for the greenbacks.
Yes, of course.
And so this collapse of the art market, maybe it's a blessing in disguise, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it's certainly too, the art, I think the art market is certainly too big. And, I can't say I'm excited or optimistic for its decline, because I'm sure, you know.
I really don't know which one is worse, if it collapsed or not, but I see a little bit of like more wiggle room if really the art market is going where they say it's going.
This is what my same photographer friend said last night, was, you know, he thought after COVID that maybe the art world would turn into blue chips and project spaces only, and that maybe that would be good. And the current state of the art market could just be the other shoe dropping from COVID after the financial rigmarole, and that who knows what's going to happen.
So look where we're speaking. We're speaking at a space that doesn't have this kind of constraint. It's called Pickle Bar, right? Yeah. And who's organizing it? New Center, which does not have any obligation to any Minister of Culture or anyone.
Yep.
So this is sort of like, but there's still, I don't consider myself autonomous.
Right.
Because there's other constraints that I have to work within.
It's called being in the world.
Yeah.
But you can have it.
Yes, definitely. But we also have courageous like institutional people like you who accept to come and like basically share experience with us. And so like spill the beans on the working of this German art and culture bureaucracy a little bit, for people who might not be familiar with it.
I was thinking about talking about more the society, because the autonomy reminded that when you think about the autonomy in Germany now, like I name it the societal fear. Like when the society collectively fears.
Yeah.
I think this is, we reached really a moment of no return, where everybody started fearing to say, which was never the case since the Second World War, when the Nazis really took over everything. I think it's a very problematic moment, because we always thought, even the Christian Democrats have kind of like an understanding of freedom of speech, not to speak about the left and agree. I'm talking about the party, the political party perspective. Like now, even the party and the political parties have fear, like the CDU, CSU, SPD, their fear of AfD they do something wrong. If they give something to their hands, so that they can be immediately abstracted because the society is so on just moving to the fascist led democracy.
Yeah.
What is not a
This is
democracy?
it.
This will not be a democracy. So I think I am very I'm very anxious about entering this era of actually we are in this era, but acting in this era in the cultural field with a state institution, like who, if we don't have these supporting politicians who always commission us, and the fundings who are led by them that they don't cut, how can we continue doing our business, which is the places for freedom of speech, like even like this horrible moment where everybody was censoring themselves. This will
It's a precursor.
precursor.
Yes.
So this is the moment of, I think, what is to fear in Germany and also more to come.
Yeah. Now, an observation Sean has had since kind of like the last couple of days, but also in Vienna, where we attended a few curated by events and stuff. That, but I'm just going to remind you. I think you articulate better than me that how you feel like Europe hasn't really experienced the post-Trump or post. I refuse to call it fascism because I not that it's even worse than that. I just want a better word for it. Yeah. Whatever you guys want to call it, right? Yeah. And in America, you're already in the second time Trump. But Trumpism is kind of like constituted, right? Yeah. Whereas Europe seems to be like still sort of 2016, 2015. Yeah. With the specter of AfD gaining more, right? Yeah. So maybe comment on that. What kind of insight you have for people who can actually learn from something that has already unfolded there and bring that experience here. If you're really still 2016, maybe we can have maybe we can learn from. Yeah.
No, that's funny because it's exactly what I was thinking of, but not specifically in the contemporary terms. It was just that I think the thing about what drove modern art was actually a great despair. That there was a deep melancholy and sort of apocalyptic feeling to the modernist project was a despairing utopianism, like a sort of utopianism in the consciousness of the dire conditions of modernity, and that I think when you look at the sort of institutional consciousness in contemporary European scene, I see that the sort of statement that this is a valuable project is a papering over or sort of like a blindness to the sort of
what is already
open void of despair of modern existence. And I think that's precisely the revelation of Trump. I think I remember extremely well that in 2015, life felt a lot more like the art world had an optimism that resembled Berlin on some level, and then sort of the air got sucked out of the balloon and it never got reinflated. And we've been like working in this sort of dire condition, like seeing the face of it. This is just a random thought, but just that, like Merlin Carpenter, I remember looking at his art in 2017, I didn't know about his art before then, and I was kind of like, oh, this is like weird, like, negative work, whatever. And then I realized, oh, he was doing this before Trump got elected, which means that he was ahead of the curve on knowing a sort of miserableism of sort of the dire straits of modern life.
Tell us about the discovery of that Baudelaire letter and the end of the world and how that fits into because if the world has ended, and I believe it has, as you know. Yeah. But it's not like everything has ended, right? So you have to find ways to deal with the post-world life.
Yeah. So this like late Baudelaire fragment called "The End of the World," I stumbled across a few months ago, and it's not the world. It's the end of culture as an edifice of humanity. That, you know, he just had, it's like 1860, and he just is, or 63 or something, and he has this, you know, clear vision of how, I mean, there's a good line in it where it's sort of like, a son will not leave his parents' house at 16, but at 12, and not to, you know, rescue a damsel from a tower, but instead to defeat his awful old papa at business. And just, you know, seeing that, you know, the sort of like, you know, romantic dreams that are supposed to drive a 16-year-old were being corrupted by a, you know, the being replaced with just the desire to accumulate. And, you know, just like, he continues it with like sort of like, and then the, you know, your wife will be, you know, grand poor, and your daughter will dream of prostituting herself, and the husband will be happy with it, like you bourgeois. And, you know, that this sort of like, these, you know, grounds of morality of the 19th century, which, you know, he's mourning not as a traditionalist, he's mourning because he has seen where things are going. Like he was, you know,
Can I read the sentence?
Yeah, sure.
So this was, to me, was like the wow moment was in the sentence.
Yeah.
Because of that one word that everybody's gonna like see how wow it is. It says, fresh examples and fresh victims of inexorable moral laws, we shall perish by that which we believe had sustained our life. Machinery will have so Americanized us, progress will have so atrophied our spiritual faculties that none of the bloody, sacrilegious, anti-natural reveries of the utopians could be compared to its actual effects.
Yeah.
And you're like thinking, he already saw America ahead, like
Yeah.
these
Americanizing in the
Ameri-
1860s.
If he's thinking about Americanization in the 1860s.
Yeah. It's a sort of, like he sees the, like a world without culture is what America already is to him, and that, you know, the foregrounding of capitalism is a corrosion to sort of the irrational excesses that are characteristic of human life. That, yeah.
So should we open it up to? Well, we can, except I want to end with a little bit of fun. Okay.
I want you to read a poem.
You read a poem, and then I want to read a poem too. But
Because you said you will start with.
Yeah, definitely. Mine is a joke, but yours is more serious.
Because
Go ahead.
I think what reminds me of, I always say, like we are so talking about the Western societies and so on.
Right.
But for me, it's important that there is kind of another approach. Like I am not coming from, I'm not born and raised in this country where I'm now living and participating in the society, politically, artistically, and anything, and in many different roles. I think it's important to focus on that there is always hope.
Yeah.
And our duty is to kind of remind the people that we are human and then not lose the humanity.
Right.
And we need to focus literally on that because we are accustomed to so many horrible things and images and everything we see and hear and experience and do with to being non-human. So I think we need to find these moments where it reminds us again, it shakes us again, it tickles us again. Either it's a sound that wakes up, either something, a setting where it breaks the silence, or it makes us really think about the moment where it can be really heard as a very naive, but I believe in the power of these moments. So I think as artists or cultural and art makers, our duty is continue and maybe be more radical or more open, even though there is actually.
Even though the world has ended.
Has ended.
Yeah, I think the hope only comes from accepting the actual state of affairs.
So there is an writer and a poet who spent more than half of his life in a prison and died in exile in Russia, in Moscow, Nazım Hikmet, and we were never allowed to read him because he was the forbidden voice. So I was like, I connected with him after I lost my mother tongue living in Germany and always talking German. I